Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm glad to have you here to experience the kickoff of this new series, Overflow. If this is your first time joining us, I would encourage you to subscribe to our channel and make sure you click the notification bell so that you'll get notified whenever we post new materials such as this. So each week, I like to initiate some sort of a challenge to you for you to text in. And last week, Allie Page was our winner. She accepted the challenge to look for blessing and made a list of all the blessings that have come from this time in quarantine. So also Jackson Pratt took the challenge to honor the authority in his life and made dinner for his parents, and his brother Colin pitched in to help do the dishes and get things cleaned up. So this week we're going to kick off a new series called Overflow, and it takes its inspiration from Isaiah 12, which says this: "With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation." Now, you can't draw water from a well with a bucket that's full of rocks because there'll be no room for the water. Also, you can't fill a bucket that's full of dirt with water because the water would become muddy and undrinkable. Finally, you can't use a bucket that is full of holes and cracks in it because, well, that bucket's not going to hold water. We're going to be using the example of these buckets for our series because our hearts are so much like buckets. They are these empty vessels that God pours His love and Spirit into when we spend time with Him in worship or devotion. That's how our relationship with God is supposed to work, but sometimes other things get in our way. Over time, our hearts can become dusty and dammed up and damaged like an old bucket. Maybe we draw water from God's well of salvation one day, but then life happens. Stress, fear, hurt, and harm make our hearts damaged vessels for God's good gifts. But during this series, we're going to look at how God works to clean, repair, refresh our hearts, and hopefully we'll spend some time with God seeking healing and forgiveness so that our relationship with Him can be fully restored. Now, our text today comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 2. And in these scriptures, it talks about a guy named John the Baptist. Now, that's not to be confused with the disciple John who wrote the Gospel. But who is this John the Baptist, and why is he important to the story of Jesus? Now, if you've been following our daily devotionals in the mornings, we've been working through the Gospel of Luke and have been looking at the story of John the Baptist, his birth and his life and ministry, preparing the way for Jesus. So before Jesus even started his ministry, John had a huge following for his ministry. He started preaching in the desert near the Jordan River. He wore weird clothes made of camel hair, and he ate bugs. And despite all of his weirdness, people found him fascinating and his message compelling. People traveled out into the wilderness to hear him talk and to be baptized by him. It was like the modern-day Burning Man festival. In fact, so many people came to hear him that even after Jesus' death and resurrection, early Christians ran into some of John the Baptist's followers over 1,000 miles away in Ephesus. John was a big deal. And Jesus even said in Luke and also in Matthew that there is no one greater than him. John was such a big deal that Jewish authorities started getting nervous and sent priests and Levites out to investigate what in the world was going on in the wilderness. When the priests and officials from Jerusalem arrived, they began to investigate what was going on. And this is what happened. We're going to start in John chapter 1, verse 19 and 20. Let's read that together. Now this was John's testimony when the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. He did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, "I am not the Messiah? So, sounds pretty simple, cut and dry, right? They asked him point blank, "Are you the Messiah?" John's answer, "No, I'm not." So what then? Why were people so drawn to him? Why did he have such a huge following? What in the world were people doing out there listening to a man who eats bugs? Now, I've been in student ministry for a while, and I've seen some students, even had some students that ate bugs, but they didn't have a huge following of people. Maybe a couple junior high boys, but that's it. So why are all these people going out there? So the priests and the officials, they decide they need to press John a little bit harder. They need answers to take back with them. So let's continue in verse 21. It says, they asked him, "Then who are you? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Finally they said, "Who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" What do you say about yourself? That's a pretty heavy question. It's kind of like John had been called to the principal's office or was being chewed out by his parents. He'd stirred up all of this commotion, and now the Jewish leaders want to know, what do you say about yourself? Who do you say you are? I wonder how I would answer that question today. I'm not sure I'd know how. Maybe you don't know either. But this is what happens next, continuing in verse 23. John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, "I am the voice of the one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord." Now the Pharisees who had been sent questioned him, "Why then do you baptize if you are not the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" "I baptize with water," John replied, "but among you stands one you do not know. He is the one who comes after me, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie." So if John said he wasn't all that, why was his message so compelling? He was not the Messiah. He was not just this crazy, infamous person. He wasn't this great warrior or a great athlete. He was simply preparing the way for someone else. So why were people coming to see John? Why was his message so compelling? He was offering baptism, a ritual that in its most basic form symbolizes God's forgiveness. These people were having their hearts washed clean. Their empty buckets were being prepared to receive God's goodness. And John, in the midst of all this, remained humble. An amazing example to the crowds of how a follower of God should behave and carry themselves. Pride and shame are two sides of the same coin. Ultimately, they are both a failure to exercise humility. You see, if a heart of a bucket is the dirt that fills the bucket is sin, and the sinfulness comes in two main forms. One we're most familiar with, and that is pride. Pride is typically how we talk about the first sin in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve thought they knew better than God. However, there's another form that we're less familiar with. That is shame. Shame is different. Shame is helpful if it leads to repentance, but if we dwell on shame, if we let it eat up inside of us, it becomes useless, and God's work cannot happen unless we let go of that shame and remember that we are made in God's image. We are called by God, and God can make us clean. John did not approach these people ashamed of the mission or ashamed of his purpose, nor was he overly proud. He did not claim to be the Messiah, but was humble and honest about who he was. C.S. Lewis once said this, "True humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less." Jesus said to love others as you love yourself. If you think terribly about yourself, you won't be able to love others properly because you'll be preoccupied with your own misery. Likewise, if you think too highly of yourself, then you won't be able to serve others properly because you won't genuinely care about them. Humility and loving and serving others well are the antidote to sin. Humility is what we find in Jesus, despite the grand and glorious status that he's entitled to. We also see humility in John the Baptist, the man who was sent to prepare the way for Jesus by washing away sin. Those who came to John saw a humble man who wasn't prideful of his accomplishments and fame, and at the same time, John wasn't ashamed of his uniqueness and his calling. John's humility gave him focus. John was free from sin and someone who embraced humility. He wasn't distracted by his own selfish agenda. He was self-confident. His self-confidence didn't depend on how others perceived him. When he was asked if he was the Messiah, he respectfully and right away said no. Washed free, John was focused. He didn't fall into the common traps of that drag us away from God's purpose, and with our insecurities and our shame. And there's the amazing thing about John. He's the secret that drove so many people to visit him in the desert. John's focus gave him purpose. There may be nothing more valuable, yet more elusive and more difficult for people to understand than their purpose. So often sin is a sidestep, a misstep, a detour from our purpose in Christ. We can be distracted by little things or become tempted by big things. John knew his purpose was to prepare the way for Jesus because he wasn't distracted by sin. As we begin this series, we're going to follow the examples of John by remembering our baptism, that moment when God first reached out to us and began the work of washing our hearts clean. Perhaps you haven't taken on that step of baptism yet. If that's the case, I would love to talk with you more and answer any questions that you might have. So as we wrap up, I want you to think about your bucket, your spiritual bucket. What does it look like? Is it clean? Does it hold water? Is it full of dirt? Does it not have any room for water? Does it have holes and unable to hold water? Your challenge this week is this: get a paper cup or a styrofoam cup, whatever you have, and make it resemble your spiritual bucket. So think about what that figurative spiritual bucket looks like for you and make that cup look like that. Then text me a picture of it. I'd love to see that representation. So I hope you're enjoying this new series, and I hope to see you here next week. Now remember, we are in the final hours of our video challenge, and what we're looking for is a short 1 to 2 minute video showing us what you've been doing to keep yourself from going stir crazy during quarantine. Now we need those videos by midnight tonight, and then Sam and I are going to spend all day tomorrow reviewing all the videos and voting on the best in each category. Then on Friday at 2 p.m., we're going to host a live video awards show to reveal the best of the best videos of the Quarantine 2020 Video Challenge. So get those videos to Sam or I, and through text, email, social media, however you can. I hope that you have a blessed week. As always, be safe, wash your hands, and stay clean. If you'd like more information on the video challenge, you can click on this video link to see a video that tells you all about that challenge. I love you guys and hope that you have a blessed week. We'll see you next time.